It wasn't until I was finally single at 62 that I began to feel whole, to feel that I was where I was supposed to be.
With 3 failed marriages behind her, it seemed as though she was never able to find a man to truly love her for who she was. Jane Fonda already had a lot to live up to from the day that she was born. Her father was actor Henry Fonda, a Broadway star who became famous for his Oscar-nominated performance in the 1940s Grapes of Wrath. Her mother was a socialite and her father's second wife, Frances Ford Seymour Brokaw. Henry and Frances had a troubled marriage from the start. As a result of his career, Henry often left his wife alone to take care of Jane and her 3 other children. Not only was he away for work, but he was also notoriously unfaithful to Frances, having had numerous affairs throughout their marriage. Speaking about her mother, Jane explained that she often saw how the strain of her parents took its toll on her mother's mental health.
Because she suffered from, well, they called it manic depression in those days. Now we say bipolarity.
Jane added that her mother was frequently institutionalized, which was hard on Jane and her siblings. When a parent isn't around, the child assumes it's her fault, assumes she isn't lovable. After years of mental health struggles, Frances could no longer bear with the pain and tragically took her own life, leaving Jane, who was just 12 years old, to take responsibility for her younger siblings. Her father had told his children that Frances had a heart attack, so it wasn't until years later that they discovered the truth in a magazine. In an exclusive interview, Jane confessed that as a child, she blamed herself for her mother's death.
That day that she came to the house, then she wouldn't have killed herself. It was my fault.
She thought that if she had done more to help, perhaps her mother wouldn't have felt so overwhelmed and chosen to end her life. It wasn't until she was older that she was able to understand her mother's decision and came to terms with the fact that there was nothing she could have done to help her. Then you can forgive and you can understand, she told The Guardian. Just mere months after their mother's death, Henry remarried Susan Blanchard, who was only 9 years older than Jane. The actress's father was also absent for most of her childhood, and when he was around, he was always cold and distant. In her autobiography, My Life So Far, Jane wrote that Henry constantly told her that she needed to lose weight.
He thought I was fat, and
How old were you when he first started telling you that?
when I started to 13, 14,
When she was only 13 years old, it took her a week to work up the courage to tell him that she'd hurt her back swimming, and when she did, he made Blanchard take care of her. Even though Henry was far from the ideal father figure, Jane still worshipped him and was desperate for his approval. In fact, it was her father who inspired her to be an activist.
and I feel so blessed as a daughter that I was able to work with him before he died and have those scenes with him and have that resolution on film with him.
She had always admired the righteous, moral characters that he played in his films and thought that maybe if she was more like that, he would finally pay some attention to her. I knew he loved these characters and I wanted him to love me. She added that although he initially thought she was a foolish, frivolous person, she believes that ultimately he was proud of her.
And I told him that I loved him and I knew he'd done the best that he could.
After dropping out of college, in 1958, Jane moved to New York to take acting lessons at the Actors Studio. She was determined to follow in her father's footsteps and become an actress, and she was going to do everything she could to make it happen. She featured in numerous Broadway plays and several unsuccessful movies, but things didn't seem to be working for her in New York. Finally, in 1963, an opportunity to film a movie in France came knocking on her door, and Jane quickly jumped at the chance. The movie was a huge success, and it rocketed Jane into stardom. That very same year, on her birthday, her agent introduced her to French-Russian filmmaker Roger Vadim.
You know, when you're young, you tend, or at least people like me, you tend to gravitate to the ones that are charismatic and brilliant and exciting.
The couple wed 2 years later, but their marriage was quite unconventional for its time. Vadim decided that they should have an open relationship and often brought his dates home. Fonda felt like she had no choice in the matter and agreed with the arrangement. However, she later admitted that she didn't enjoy any of it but was determined to try and make her marriage work. Unfortunately, another problem arose in their marriage, as Vadim continued to ask Jane for money, which she reluctantly gave him. When she later learned that he was using it for gambling, racking up countless debts, Fonda had no choice but to pay them off using an inheritance from her mother. However, when Fonda took an interest in political activism in the US, Vadim didn't agree with anything that she wanted to stand up for. Finally, Jane had had enough and filed for divorce. Their split was finalized in 1973, although the former couple stayed friends and made an effort to co-parent their daughter, Vanessa. In 1971, Fonda met Tom Hayden on stage at an anti-war rally. They spoke about their shared passion for fighting what they thought was right, and after getting to know one another, Jane was smitten.
And by the time it was over, I was in love with him. I said to my roommate, I'm gonna marry this guy.
The pair married in 1973, just as their divorce from Vadim was finalized. Hayden started running for political office and founded the Campaign for Economic Democracy, or CED, to fund his campaigns and other liberal candidates. Fonda took on the role of breadwinner, starring in movies, writing books, and launching her famous Jane Fonda's Workout, which made her a famous home workout guru. In 1982, the New York Times reported that the workout videos were making a whopping $30,000 a month, and it was all going towards Hayden's campaign. Despite this, Hayden was often critical of Fonda's activism, and then, as Fonda put it to the New Yorker, he fell in love with somebody, and it really devastated me. However, the breakup with Hayden in 1988 also freed her to become an activist in her own right. She said of her relationship with Hayden, "I needed someone far wiser and more knowledgeable than I was about movement building and politics. I learned so much from him that I am forever grateful for." When it came to motherhood, Jane admitted that she felt completely unprepared when her children were young. She had 2 biological children, Vanessa Vadim with Roger and Troy Garrity with Tom. She also has an adopted daughter, Mary Williams, who came to live with Fonda when she was 16. However, Jane confessed that rather than focus on being a good mother, she was driven to continue with her activism. She told the New Yorker that Hayden was the one that took care of her other 2 children. Once, when Jane was putting him to bed after being away for a long time, Troy looked up at me and asked, "What's the point of having a mother?" Despite not being a very good parent, during her children's early years, Fonda says that she's trying to make up for it now.
I wasn't a very good parent, and how I regret that, and I'm trying to make up for it.
Really? Is there still time to make up for it?
There's always time. It's never too late. Yeah.
Her divorce from Hayden was finalized in 1990, and it wasn't much later that John got a call from a stranger who happened to be a famous billionaire. The stranger was none other than Ted Turner, founder of CNN. Just 1 month into their marriage, the actress found out that her new husband was having an affair. Their vows were still fresh in the air, and yet Jane was betrayed yet again by the man that she loved. Determined to make their marriage work, however, Fonda stayed with Ted. However, as time went by, Jane started to feel like she was losing herself. She was making herself smaller, fading into the background, all because she was trying so hard to see past the cracks in her marriage. She gave up acting, took a step back from her activism, and became the perfect image of the glamorous, silent housewife. Thankfully, Jane knew that she was born to do bigger and better things. She knew she wanted to make a difference in the world, and playing the part of housewife wasn't going to cut it. In 2001, Fonda left Turner, later telling The New Yorker, "It was really hard to leave, and yet I knew that if I stayed, I was never going to become who I meant to be as a whole person." Being single in her 60s before meeting Perry gave her the chance to heal the wounds patriarchy had dealt me, to become a whole, full-voiced woman. She added, "For me, the personal meant becoming a single woman, no longer silencing my voice, slowly becoming the subject of my own life.